Hello, welcome back to EDH on a Budget. I'm your host, Iceman, and today we're going to be going over my new favorite commander, Ty Joaquin Perfect Shot. You probably haven't heard of this commander because it is seriously underplayed. It is a legendary human mercenary, which is an outlaw if you are paying attention to those cards that care about outlaws. Its stats are 2-3, and it has whenever a source you control deals non-combat damage to a creature equal to that creature's toughness, draw a card. And it also has pay X, tap if a source you control would deal non-combat damage to a permanent or player this turn, it deals that much damage plus X instead. So those two abilities might seem a little different, but they help each other, because if you build this deck with effects that damage multiple creatures or even one creature, and it's not enough to take out the creature, this allows you to, like a mana sink, to put extra damage into your damage spells. But this isn't for just one card per time you tap it. This is for the end of turn. So you can get into some tricky stuff where if you have lots of ways to damage opponents, like regularly, like say Reckless Fireweaver, which is a 1 in a red human artificer. 1 in a red's the mana cost, and the stats are 1-3. Whenever an artifact enters the battlefield under your control, Reckless Fireweaver deals 1 damage to each opponent. So if you have Reckless Fireweaver on the battlefield, and say you create a treasure incidentally, that is going to trigger Reckless Fireweaver, and if you sink 4 mana or whatever you want into this, it's going to deal that 1 damage plus 4 more damage to each opponent. So that 1 treasure you created plus the 4 you sink into your commander will deal 5 damage to each opponent, so that's 15 damage. And if you create another treasure, then that's another 15 that turn, and it can really add up. There's a few ways you could go with this commander. Ty Joaquin is 16 cents and Reckless Fireweaver is 60 cents. So one way you could go about it is the dealing damage to opponents straight to their faces, and that is a decent win con, because that is a lot harder for people to stop. You can't just put out blockers to stop it, because you're evading that. And if you put out blockers, then that's actually going to help you draw more cards. Usually 1-for-1 removal isn't ideal because you're going down in cards, and you're taking out one threat, and the other people are not being interacted with, and you're going down in cards in your hand. But with the ability of drawing cards, if you deal damage equal to that creature's toughness, that says a lot, because it doesn't actually say you need to kill the creature. So even if you have an indestructible creature on the battlefield and you deal 1 damage to it, you're going to draw a card. And it doesn't say creature you don't control. So this is another way you could build it. You could have a creature build the deck so it has a bunch of 1/1s, and then you play cards that deal 1 damage to each creature, and then you just draw a bunch of cards. And that is actually probably the best way to draw cards in this deck. Not just deal 5 damage to one creature, but deal damage to multiple creatures, and then you can increase that damage with your commander to take out whatever number is the most. So a good card for this is a sorcery called Blazing Volley, which is about 10 cents. It deals 1 damage to each creature your opponent controls. So this is not going to damage your creatures, so you're safe. And from there you just got to figure out what you want to take out most, or what the most toughness for the bang for the buck is. Because if you have 4 creatures with power 3 toughness, 1 isn't going to be enough. You're going to have to tap your commander, sink 2 mana into it to boost that Blazing Volley to deal that damage to take them out. So your Blazing Volley will have drawn multiple cards in that instance. One of the weaknesses with damage based strategies for removal is indestructible. You still would draw the cards, but if you were to kill if you were to deal the damage the right amount, but the problem is then it's still there. Red has a few ways of removing indestructible. So we have Hour of Devastation, which is 40 cents. And it has a sorcery for 3 red. All creatures lose indestructible until end of turn. Hour of Devastation deals 5 damage to each creature and each non-bolus planeswalker. 5's going to be enough to kill most creatures. Again, you can still pump that damage up with your commander if it wasn't enough to kill them. And losing your commander is not so big a deal because it only costs red and a white. So you rebuilding is going to be a lot faster than everybody else. And taking out the planeswalkers is not always relevant, but it is nice. I'd actually say red handles planeswalkers one of the best because of a lot of the spells say deal damage to target creature or planeswalker or to any target. And any target can actually go to battles too if you were to find some you want to put in the deck, which is a possible strategy. I'd say you could go artifacts or spell slinger. Maybe even dragons, possibly, just because dragons have a lot of ways to deal damage. Next up, we have Starstorm, which is in almost every precon in red, but it shines so well in this deck. This instant is 19 cents, and it is red X. Starstorm deals X damage to each creature, and it has cycling for 3. So with this, you don't even need to tap your commander to get it to the damage you want, because this is going to deal the whatever damage that you want. The only time tapping your commander might be beneficial for a card like this would be if you had something like Zerta, which reduces activation costs by 2. So in essence, that would make it so when you tap your commander, you could tap it for 2 and deal even more, which may not be a bad suggestion for the deck, but we're gonna go over another card that I like in many decks, but in this deck it is especially good. Surge of Salvation for 55 cents. This is an instant for 1 white mana. You and permanents you control gain hexproof until end of turn. Prevent all damage that black and or red sources would deal to creatures you control this turn. So this is a way to give your creatures immunity from your damage effects. So if you're playing those effects that deal damage to all creatures, it's going to be red, and it's not going to affect your creatures the turn you play this. Giving your creatures and you hexproof is a big plus side, so it's kind of a defensive spell that could also be offensive in this deck. Another way you could do it is you could give your creatures indestructible. So if you're dealing damage through the many ways that just deals damage and doesn't remove indestructible, you'll still get that card draw if it's equal to the toughness, but you won't lose your creatures. And then the last way to protect your creatures would be giving them protection. So if you give it protection from red, then your damage won't deal the damage to the creatures, which is good in that your creatures won't die, but it also won't draw you a card. So I'd say in this case, protection is probably the least desirable form of protection for your creatures. I'd say indestructible is going to be better. And while you could play cards to phase out your creatures, you don't really want that either, because then you're not going to get those card draw abilities. So I would recommend cards that give indestructible, and there's lots of auras and equipment and ways to do that. And last up we have Caught in the Crossfire, which does not see much play at all, and it is super cheap. It is only 3 cents, but fits perfectly in this deck. This instant is red, and then spree. So you're going to pay extra for one of the other two abilities that you can choose. You could choose both, but you're probably not going to want to in this deck. It says +1, caught in the crossfire, deals 2 damage to each outlaw creature. That's assassin, mercenary, pirate, rogue, warlocks, they're outlaws. Or pay +1, caught in the crossfire, deals 2 damage to each non-outlaw creature. So it is a little one-sided in that you could, avoid hitting your commander. Your commander does have 3 toughness, so it's certainly possible that you won't be killing your commander with, even if this were 2 damage. But with how much damage you're going to sling around, it's certainly possible that you could incidentally kill him. But this is something that you would probably want to hit for each non-outlaw creature for the 3 mana, and then possibly tap your commander to have this deal extra damage to get to whatever you need for the most card draw. So this deck is it's very fun, and closing out the deck with dealing direct damage to opponents will be it's a good win con, especially because it's also a common, many of it, if it's deal damage to targets, multiple targets, it's not just your win con, it's going to be your removal. And turning removal into card draw, Red has ways to turn this type of damage based removal into treasures. I could think of other cards that we've gone over before, and it's just really fun. I'm definitely going to build this deck. And thanks for watching.